Today, Israel passes a new law labelling the main UN provider of aid to Gaza a terrorist organisation, threatening its operations in the Middle East.
If we're going to see the continued illegality, I think we are going to see very serious moves to have Israel expelled from the United Nations.
A family in shock and a man in custody after a woman's body is found at a home in Melbourne. US President Joe Biden cast his vote in the election, while Donald Trump's campaign contends with the fallout of racist jokes told at his New York rally. And the Matildas come from behind to win their first game over Germany in almost 20 years. Hello, I'm Gemma Veness and this is ABC News Mornings, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. Israel's parliament has voted to ban the United Nations Palestinian Aid Agency from operating in Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. Israel alleges hundreds of staff at UNRWA have ties to militants, while the agency says it acts quickly to purge any suspected militants from its ranks. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran reports from Jerusalem.
Israel's parliament resumed its sittings after weeks of a break, and this was one of the first items of business on its agenda. And despite the calls from the international community not to adopt this proposal to outlaw UNRWA's operations in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, lawmakers have backed it, and backed it overwhelmingly. The main bill receiving 92 votes in favour, and that's out of 120 members of the Knesset who could have voted. This will have significant consequences for the provision of aid in the Palestinian territories, because it means that UNRWA cannot operate, and UNRWA has been the agency doing the bulk of that work for decades, not only throughout the recent conflicts we've seen in this part of the world, the war in Gaza in particular, but for a number of decades. UNRWA has been responsible for providing food, for providing shelter, for providing things like medical facilities, and indeed even teaching Palestinian children in schools set up across the Palestinian territories. This law won't come into force for another 90 days, and that time frame was put in place so that Israel could figure out and could make new arrangements for aid for the Palestinian population. It is very interesting to note that the Knesset has adopted this proposal without that crucial detail being sorted out prior. And this will likely receive a lot of discussion and a lot of condemnation from around the world, given how the international community has been reacting to this proposal even before it went to a vote. We know that the international community, led by the United States, but also Australia, Penny Wong, the foreign minister, signing a statement over the weekend, along with the foreign ministers of a number of other countries, including the United Kingdom and South Korea, France and Canada, all urging Israeli lawmakers not to go down this path, but those calls have not been heeded. We have heard from the boss of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini. He has issued a short statement on the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, where he has said that this is the latest example of Israel trying to delegitimize his agency, and that there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinian children in particular who will suffer as a result of this decision. This has been part of a concerted campaign by the Israeli government for not only the course of the war in Gaza, but even before that. It certainly has ramped up since the war in Gaza began on the 7th of October, saying that UNRWA was a threat to Israel's security, accusing UNRWA's workers of being involved in the October 7 attacks and helping Hamas in the many months since. There have been investigations into that. Some UNRWA staff have been fired as a result. Many others have been exonerated, and indeed the agency's own workforce has suffered as a result of that war in Gaza, hundreds being named as having died in the course of the conflict. This will have reverberations not only here in the Middle East, but right around the world, as everyone tries to come to grips with what has happened here at the Knesset. And it comes at an interesting time as well, with ceasefire talks restarting in Qatar Qatar, the Qatari capital Doha, hosting these negotiations to try to bring to an end the war in Gaza. An interim proposal has been put forward by the Egyptian president, suggesting an initial 2-day ceasefire that would allow for the release of 4 Israeli hostages by Hamas and a group of Palestinian prisoners by Israel. There's no suggestion at this stage whether or not Israel would be prepared to agree to that, but Saudi Arabian media are citing sources within Hamas saying that that group is open to this prospect. You would have to say that the decision here in the Knesset is indicative of the fact that Israel is very reluctant to give any ground in this conflict, and that could potentially give an indication as to how these ceasefire talks could run in Qatar. Talks which we've seen in the past with early signs of promise, which have fallen over very quickly.
The agency's former chief spokesperson, Chris Gunness, says the legislation will likely increase pressure on Israel's international allies to agree to some form of action against them at the UN.
First of all, we've seen Israel ignore all of the red lines which the Biden administration has laid out. They were told to abide by international humanitarian law. What we've seen a year later is nearly 43,000 people killed, including 17,000 women and children. They were told not to go into the city of Rafah in the south, and yet they went in. Time and time again, these red lines have been ignored by the Israelis. And let us hope that the relevant powers can put the right sort of pressures, because Palestinian civil society organizations, as we speak, are very active in New York, waging a campaign to have Israel thrown out effectively of the General Assembly, just as apartheid South Africa was thrown out. And the reason for that is that this is, they say, a violation of the UN Charter. It's a violation of the 1948 Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, under which Israel is obliged to allow UNRWA to have bank accounts, to lease property, and so on and so forth. It's a violation of the rules of belligerent occupation, under which Israel, as the occupying power, is obliged to deliver services rather than to impede them. And very finally, it's a violation, arguably, of the provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention. Israel was ordered on the 26th of January this year to make sure that international humanitarian aid flowed into Gaza unimpeded. What has it done? It has said that it wants to ban the very organization described by many people, including those in Australia, the UN Secretary General, and other statesmen, as the backbone of the world's response at a time when hundreds of thousands of people are at severe risk of starvation.
Homicide detectives have arrested a 33-year-old man after the discovery of a woman's body in Melbourne's northeast. Reporter Stephanie Ferrier joins us now from Melbourne. Steph, can you take us through what happened?
Good morning, Gemma. Yes, this is just such an awful case. Emergency crews were called to a home in Reed Street in South Morang, which is about 20 kilometres northeast of Melbourne CBD, around 10 o'clock yesterday morning. And that is where they discovered the body of 35-year-old Nikita as a party. A 33-year-old man has been taken into custody for questioning by homicide squad detectives. He's also of South Morang, and understandably the grief-stricken family of Nikita as a party is really struggling to come to terms with her death. We spoke to her brother Sean, who said that the family first became concerned when Nikita failed to turn up to a family barbecue on Saturday, and also failed to respond to a series of texts that they sent her. This is what he had to say about his sister.
She'll do anything for anyone. She's a gentle soul. She'll help anyone. She always is a good listener. I've told her many, many things. She was she was an earpiece for me, and she was my younger sister as well, only 35, and she just didn't see the bad in people. Always saw the good, and that's it. And I'm going to miss it. It just feels like a dream, to be honest. It doesn't feel real.
That's Nikita Azzopardi's brother, Sean, and he says that she was actually seeing the 33-year-old man who has been arrested. He says that the last time he saw his sister alive was when she'd organised a go-karting outing for his son's 15th birthday, and he says if he only had have known at the time that that was the last time he was ever going to see her, he probably would have talked to her more, asked her questions, maybe even taken more photos. And he says that he just simply does not know how his parents and his brother are going to be able to cope with this. He's trying to stay strong for his family. We've heard also from Homicide Squad detectives they are continuing their investigations, and they say that the exact circumstances surrounding her death is yet to be determined.
Steph Ferrier in Melbourne. And if this story has raised any issues for you, you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault and Family Violence Counselling Helpline on 1800 RESPECT, which is 1800 737 732. US President Joe Biden has voted early in the presidential election with just over a week to go before polling day. His Vice President Kamala Harris and her rival Donald Trump continue to campaign in the all-important swing states. North America correspondent Jade McMillan has more from Pennsylvania.
It was only a few months ago that Joe Biden was a candidate in this election, but instead we've today seen the president lining up at a polling station in his home state of Delaware so that he could cast an early ballot for his Vice President Kamala Harris. It didn't appear as though Joe Biden got much special treatment at that polling place. That line took nearly 40 minutes to get to the front, just over a week out from Election Day. He, among millions of people, as you said, who have voted well and truly ahead of November 5th local time. Joe Biden also took the opportunity to take a swipe at Kamala Harris's opponent, Donald Trump. He held a very high-profile rally at New York's Madison Square Garden yesterday, and one of the many speakers was a comedian who described the US territory of Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. Now, that comment has attracted a lot of criticism today. Donald Trump's campaign has taken the fairly unusual step of distancing itself from those remarks. They've said that it was a joke that doesn't reflect the views of the former president. But here's what Joe Biden had to say.
It's simply embarrassing. Beneath any president. But that's what we're getting used to. That's why this election is so important.
Now, Donald Trump has hit back at that. He's also accused Democrats of sidelining the president from Kamala Harris's campaign in this final stage. We hear a lot about the swing states in this election, the 7 out of the 50 US states where the race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is considered competitive, the states that could ultimately end up deciding the outcome. Pennsylvania is one of them, and here in Erie County in the state's northwest, it's sort of seen as a battleground within a battleground. That's because in every election since Barack Obama was first elected in 2008, the candidate that got the most votes in this part of Pennsylvania ended up winning the White House. So it's seen as a bellwether, a bit of a gauge for how Americans more generally are feeling, and it's getting a lot of attention from both campaigns at the moment. We spoke to some locals about how they're feeling just over a week out.
We had 4 years of Trump and he did nothing for us, so we have to give her the opportunity to show us. And like I said, we're not going back. So it's turning into a woman's world now too. It's time for a woman president.
I'm going to vote. I'm just not sure who I'm going to vote for. I don't know yet. I still haven't made my mind up.
Sometimes he's very brash, and that's fine. That is who Donald Trump is. And you like him or you don't. My theory is I can overlook a lot. Give us good policies.
One thing that everyone we spoke to pretty much did agree with was that they do believe the opinion polls when they suggest that this is going to be an incredibly close race. There have been a lot of questions raised about whether we should trust the polls this time around, given they tended to underestimate support for Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020. A lot of experts have said we just can't know at this point in time if they're painting a true picture, but the overwhelming assumption, at least, is that it does look like it's going to be a nail-biter.
Thousands of protesters have voiced their anger outside Georgia's parliament in Tbilisi after the opposition called on them to reject the country's disputed election results. The ruling Georgian Dream Party say they secured almost 54% of the vote, which was free and fair. The opposition says Russia intervened, and vote monitors say they registered incidents of vote buying, voter intimidation and ballot stuffing. Now, speaking outside the parliament, the pro-EU president Salome Zurabishvili called on protesters to continue to defy the results.
No one recognises this election, but everyone tells us that we must continue the investigation and bring it to an end. Now is not the time for pessimism. It's time to defend your votes very calmly, decisively, purposefully. The results written here will not be the final results. Together, we will achieve this.
Protesters fear that if it stands, Georgia will become more closely aligned with Russia. They say the official results do not represent the will of the people.
With this Georgian dream, it is not Georgian dream, it is Russian dream.
People are upset because it's obvious that election was rigged.
For any adequate, normal citizen, it's clear that the result doesn't represent the clear will of Georgian populations.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, seen as Russia's greatest ally within the EU, has made a surprise visit to Georgia to congratulate Georgia's Dream Party. The ruling government has been accused of becoming increasingly authoritarian, recently passing the Foreign Agent Bill that's been likened to Russian law. However, the Prime Minister says the country is still committed to achieving full integration into the EU by 2030.
Everyone understands that if economic indicators are not adequate, no one will accept the country into the European Union. Therefore, development in all directions is important for us to achieve Georgia's full integration into the EU by 2030, and everything will be done to accomplish this.
The European Union, the United States and NATO have called for an investigation into the alleged voting irregularities. Russia has strongly rejected allegations of election interference. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Georgia has been fighting for democracy for years.
They have a right to know what happened this weekend, and they have a right to see that electoral irregularities are investigated swiftly, transparently and independently. Georgians, like all Europeans, must be the masters of their own destiny.
New South Wales teachers have secured an 11th hour pay deal heading off industrial action in the state. The union has negotiated a 10% pay rise, cost of living bonuses, more student-free days and the right to disconnect after 3 p.m. Reporter Miles Holbrook-Walk joins us now from Sydney. Miles, tell us what will teachers be getting with this deal?
Well, Gemma, it's a range of hard-fought concessions along with a pay increase of 10%. Now, that's going to be 3% each year over 3 years, as well as a top-up of superannuation by 0.5% in years 1 and 2. But that pay increase is by no means where this deal ends. There's actually been a lot of concessions around what life looks like for teachers at work, and that includes more pupil-free days, now 8 pupil-free days. This was seen as a key victory to ensure that there was more time for teachers to prepare classrooms and classroom lessons, stuff that maybe isn't seen by students or their parents, but of course is essential to preventing burnout and of course to retaining staff. However, the Teachers Federation of New South Wales says their battles are by no means over. Now they want to focus on picking up more funding for public schools right across the state to the tune of more than $1 billion.
This is the opportunity for the Prime Minister to step up, for Anthony Albanese to give our schools the best chance to be that Prime Minister our public schools deserve. All we want is the best outcomes for our children, no matter how poor or wealthy they are, no matter where they're located throughout the country. Our children matter. We want Anthony Albanese to join us in that commitment to ensure that this nation's public schools and its students get the best chance in life.
So that's Henry Rajendra there from the New South Wales Teachers Federation. Another material consequence of this deal has also been, in the eyes of the state government, that they've had improving retention rates of teachers overall and that their classrooms are better staffed. Of course, right across the country, though, each jurisdiction is also competing with others, not just to retain its staff within its own state or territory, but also to potentially poach or entice teachers where there are shortages right across the workforce. So these material consequences, and if New South Wales is able to pull teachers from other states and territories, that, Gemma, remains to be seen.
Reporter Miles Holbrook-Walk in Sydney. Thank you. The Coalition is calling for former Qantas boss Alan Joyce to front a Senate inquiry to explain his connections with the Prime Minister. It follows reports Anthony Albanese dealt directly with Mr Joyce to get free upgrades while he was the Transport Minister. Political reporter Isabel Rowe joins me now from Parliament House in Canberra. Isabel, why do the opposition want Alan Joyce to answer questions about this?
Well, the Coalition want Alan Joyce to be put under oath, essentially, and face public scrutiny and answer questions about whether he has ever received any phone calls from Anthony Albanese asking for flight upgrades. Now, this is a story that stemmed from reporting in 9 newspapers and a book written by one of their columnists, Joe Aston, who says that Mr Albanese had 22 flights upgraded by requesting those upgrades directly from Alan Joyce, the former CEO of Qantas. Now, the Prime Minister has defended this. He says that there is no issue here. He's declared everything as per the rules. But the Coalition are obviously keen to politicise this, and they would like Mr Albanese to answer more questions about it, especially, as they say, if he did make these calls to Alan Joyce, it was done while he was the Transport Minister and he oversaw a portfolio that dealt with Qantas and airports and other issues like that. The ABC has put questions to Anthony Albanese on whether he did make those phone calls to Alan Joyce, and we're yet to hear back. We have heard calls for that Senate inquiry earlier today from Bridget McKenzie, the Liberal Senator, and also we've heard from Amanda Rishworth, one of the senior Labor ministers.
I do not have a hotline to request upgrades. I have received an upgrade in 2018 that I declared. But to my knowledge, no Transport Minister other than Anthony Albanese has done this.
You know, quite frankly, I think this has been a complete pile-on the Prime Minister. I mean, it's been, he's publicly declared very, very clearly what he has been gifted, as has other MPs. And I think the pile-on from the Coalition really shows that I think there's something to, if you are in a glass house, don't throw stones.
And we are due to hear from the Prime Minister a bit later this morning in a press conference, so no doubt he'll have some of those questions put to him again.
Isabel Rowe at Parliament House, thank you. It's been 4 weeks since Australia's vaping laws changed, allowing adults to buy vapes from a pharmacy without a prescription in most states and territories. The AMA president says the new laws are having a positive effect and are leading the way in protecting people from the dangers of accessing black market vapes. But Dr Danielle McMullen says there is a long way to go.
It is early days, but that's in fact where we're seeing the best results anecdotally so far. Certainly the news from school principals and parents is that they are seeing far fewer children vaping in schools, and we are seeing that it's harder for kids and young people to get their hands on vapes, which of course was our primary goal in these world-leading reforms. Governments are working on modern ways to get in the ears of young people, and that often does mean finding them on social media or other platforms where they live, rather than necessarily some of the big campaigns that we've seen before.
It's time to check in on the weather now with Nate Byrne. Nate, morning. Now, we've got heat and fire danger in the north being your focus today. What are we expecting?
Lots of both, actually, Gemma. Morning. Essentially, right now, we've got a high-pressure system in the south that's helping to keep skies clear and pretty calm, but it's also trapping a lot of hot air up top. With the trough ringing the country, that heat is combining with the uplift from the trough to help trigger some thunderstorm activity. And the reason I'm keeping an eye on that is also because of the heat that's been trapped with very slow-moving wind over pretty hot ground for quite some time now. In fact, we've had heat waves right through northern Australia for couple of weeks for parts. Now, we are going to see a bit of relief for some parts. Queensland, the Northern Territory, things are going to ease off just a little bit over the coming days because we're about to see a bit of a burst of tropical activity. So a bit of cloud, that'll help cool things down along with some rain. Increasing though into the northwest of WA, we're going to see that heat just lingering there. Now today, while we're still dealing with increased heat wave conditions in the Territory and Queensland, we've also got this really broad swathe of high fire danger, particularly across the north, but for parts of the south too. We're sitting well above average in some parts of the country. South Australia is a great example. Most of that state is well above average right now. But extreme fire conditions are the real focus in the Territory. And Gemma, we're at that time of year. We've got fires burning. In fact, some advice level fires in the Territory, in WA, even in Tasmania right now that we'll watch closely. And it doesn't take much for those to kick off and really get going. Now, we're also keeping an eye on more storms because where you've got increased fire danger and thunderstorm activity, there's a risk there too. Up through WA and for the top end, we've got a risk of some of those storms, essentially anywhere where that trough was, so including getting down into Queensland. But you can see for most of us, it's a pretty settled day ahead.
What are you watching through the outlook?
Largely more of the same, although there are a couple of standout things I want you to keep an eye on. It'll be all different parts of the country, so follow me as we go. Thursday, we'll be looking to the tropics because we're going to see a bit more action there. Friday, southeastern Queensland, northeast New South Wales, another burst of wet weather. And then we've got a front coming through into the southeast for the weekend. None of this is going to deliver huge totals, but we'll watch this front in particular because it taps in, if you can see where the wind areas are coming, it taps into that heat in the northwest of the country and will bring a quick burst of warmth into the southeast corner, which will be welcome for many, I'm sure. Not a huge amount of rain here. There's that decent drop for the tropics, maybe 50 millimetres for parts of the Territory. Another round of storms delivering 20, maybe 30 millimetres for southeastern Queensland, northeastern New South Wales. And the other standout is Tassie's west. Don't ever get much protection there from the high pressure systems in the southeast, so a bit of wet weather there. But for most of the rest of the country, Gemma, this end of October is going to be relatively settled.
And around the states, Nate, what's happening?
All right, let's get into it. Queensland, we've got a risk of storms for you today and some showers. It's all very isolated and hit and miss, but essentially if you're in the interior, there's a risk. Anywhere south of Proserpine, east of about Emerald and Stanthorpe, it's showers and storms. And then a chance of storms north of Proserpine too, but that'll be away from the east coast. Brisbane is looking at a possible shower from late this morning, perhaps early this afternoon as well. There could be a risk of a storm. You'll get to 29 degrees, but it's really one of those that you're either going to get a little bit or you're going to get nothing. In New South Wales, some of that stormy weather just gets into the northeast of the state. Otherwise, skies are clear and it's starting a bit partly cloudy, both in Sydney and Canberra, but you'll both get sunny afternoons. 23 for the harbour city, 25 in the nation's capital. In Victoria, we're still a bit of a state of two stories. In the north, clear skies, pretty warm. In the south, much more mild with some cloud. We've had some showers around this morning. That's pretty much going to be done by later this morning. It's getting to 19 in Melbourne. You've got a partly cloudy day. In Tasmania, westerly winds are carrying a little bit of shower activity into the west and the far south, but that's it. Away from that, it should be clear skies. 20 on the way for Hobart. Over in South Australia, we've got a dry one pretty much across the board. Some those warm temperatures for all but the southeastern coastal fringe. Adelaide's getting to 25 today. Over in WA, we've got those storms through the interior. Now, they could get as far south as probably the northern parts of the Euclid district. We've also got some light showers potentially developing along the southern coast of the southwest land division, but a clear day for Perth, 32 there. And then up north, those storms continue up through WA to the Kimberley and then across the top end. Mostly up here, it's the heat that's the focus. And if you're in Darwin, Gemma, you've got to deal with both a possible storm and a pretty warm top of 36.
Thanks, Nate. This is ABC News. Our top stories. Israel's parliament has passed controversial legislation targeting the UN's main provider of aid into Gaza. The new law will see Israel cut ties with UNRWA and block the agency from operating in Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. The UN had warned the bills will make it impossible for its agency to fulfil its mandate, effectively cutting off aid to millions of refugees. A man remains in police custody after the death of a woman in Melbourne's northeast yesterday. Family members discovered 35-year-old Nikita Azzopardi's body at her home after she failed to show up for a family gathering or respond to messages. Police are trying to determine the circumstances of her death and are treating it as suspicious. US President Joe Biden has voted early in the presidential election with just over a week to go before polling day. He chatted with voters as he waited in line for about 40 minutes to cast his ballot for Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, Donald Trump's campaign is contending with the fallout of racist jokes told at his New York rally. And a stunning goal from Kyra Cooney-Cross and a late header from Claire Hunt has given the Matildas a 2-1 come-from-behind victory over Germany. The international friendly was held in Duisburg and is Australia's first win over Germany since 2005, when Tom Samani was also head coach. Let's get more now on our top story. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has responded to Israel's move to ban UNRWA from operating in Israel, the West Bank and Gaza. She says UNRWA does life-saving work. Australia opposes the Israeli Knesset's decision to severely restrict UNRWA's work. On Sunday, Australia joined Canada, France, Germany, Japan, South Korea and the UK to urge Israel's Knesset not to proceed with this legislation. A day after his packed-out rally in New York, Donald Trump's presidential campaign is dealing with the fallout from a series of racist remarks made by speakers at the event.
Madison Square Garden, how we feeling, huh?
Comedian Tony Hinchcliffe was a warm-up act for the Republican candidate. He used crass language in a series of jokes about Latinos, Jews and black people. But it's this line that's drawing the most criticism.
There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Last night we had a great rally at Madison Square Garden.
Not deterred, Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail, appearing at events in Georgia. The Trump campaign says the comments do not reflect the former president's views. While in Wisconsin, his vice presidential pick sidestepped criticism about the New York event.
I haven't seen the joke. Maybe it's a stupid racist joke, as you said. Maybe it's not. I haven't seen it. I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the joke. But I think that we have to stop getting so offended at every little thing in the United States of America. I'm so over it.
Some Republicans and Democrats are denouncing the racist remarks made in New York, along with prominent Puerto Rican celebrities. Now, it's something Kamala Harris is trying to capitalise on in her pitch to voters.
I will never forget. They understand that they want a president of the United States who's about uplifting the people and not berating, not calling America a garbage can, which is what Donald Trump, those are the words he has used.
Puerto Rico is an unincorporated US territory in the Caribbean. Its 3.2 million residents are US citizens, although they don't have voting representation in Congress, and the island doesn't vote for president. But they do have an influence with relatives on the mainland. And Americans of Puerto Rican origin or ancestry in the swing state of Pennsylvania could sway next week's vote.
It's a shame that man thinks about us. When he was there 15, 20 years ago, he had a golf court. He had hotels over there. He lost everything, and now he's, bashing us and talking bad about us. We're part of the United States. We are Americans.
I don't like that they say that to Puerto Rico. They're doing their best too, but there's a lot of lies, and a person doing things is not correct.
Oh, about the comedian? No, that was a foul. He should have never said that or joke about that.
Just over a week from Election Day, the stakes are high. Arson is suspected of being behind fires in ballot boxes used to collect early votes in Washington State and Oregon. Authorities say there's evidence to suggest the attacks are linked. Our elections analyst Casey Briggs is with me now for more on this. Casey, the FBI is investigating these ballot box fires. Can these votes be recast?
So there's two ballot boxes that have been set alight here, Gemma. One of them, the one in Oregon, only 3 ballots were destroyed. And it sounds like election officials have been able to work out who those ballots belong to, and so they can go back and get in touch with them and they can recast their ballot. The bigger issue is the one in Washington State where hundreds of ballots have been destroyed. Now, election officials have said if they place their ballot, if a person placed their ballot in that box since the time it was last emptied, and they've said the time that was, they should get back in touch with the elections authorities there, where they will be able to cast a replacement ballot, and we should say that means they'll get to have their vote valid class. There's no counted. There's no risk of their vote being double counted because all ballots that go through this process will get checked against the electoral roll, so they can only be cast once. So there's no risk of double voting here. The risk is that someone who has voted will not get that message and will not realise that their vote has been destroyed. The other risk is that this could inspire potentially other incidents into the future, because this is clearly an attack on the democratic process that's been done here. An incendiary device placed next to the box is what the FBI has described what has happened here. This is not a safe state. This is not a swing state, in the presidential election. But what is really interesting there is this is a very competitive district for Congress. And so there is a risk here that if it is a very close election, that this incident, other incidents like it, if God forbid there happen to be any, could become an issue and become a dispute after the votes are counted.
Meantime, Casey, Elon Musk, he's now being sued over his cash giveaway.
Yeah, he's being sued by the Philadelphia District Attorney. This is a cash giveaway where Elon Musk has been promising to give away $1 million every day to someone randomly selected who signs a petition run by his super PAC, the America PAC, and is a registered voter. To sign that petition, you have to give up your personal identifying information and make it available to that PAC as well, which is, I guess, the real value in that to the America PAC and to indirectly the Trump campaign. Now, the Philadelphia District Attorney is basically saying that is a lottery, and it's an unregulated lottery, and therefore under Pennsylvania state law it is unlawful. They've said in the suit that yes, these citizens are being lured to give up their personal identifying information and make a political pledge in exchange for the chance to win $1 million. That is a lottery. So a little bit to watch there. But what the other thing that this issue shows us, this giveaway shows us, is an attempt very late in the piece for the Republican Party through an indirect super PAC run by Elon Musk to bolster the Trump campaign's ground game, a ground game that has been perceived as being a little bit weaker than the Democrats' one, because the Trump campaign has really focused more on legal election integrity, law changes, and bolstering its sort of legal team for the aftermath of the election. And the ground game is really important in these elections because voting is voluntary. And Gemma, I want to bring in someone to this conversation who has his ear much closer to the ground in Washington, DC. He's going to be joining us next Wednesday as the results come in to help us understand the vote count. Professor Simon Jackman, who's an expert in US politics and political polling. G'day all the way across the world, Simon. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you, Casey.
So, Simon, you are on the ground in the US. You've been there for a couple of weeks now. I might just, first of all, get your take on the vibe on the ground. What's your impression of the state of this race?
Oh, Casey, it's unlike any election I've ever seen my entire adult lifehood studying US elections. I came to the United States and have done a tour of colleagues, former students, working both in academia and on the campaigns. No one is prepared to stick their neck out and make a prediction about how this race is likely to go. Everybody is focusing on how even early voting statistics, 2020, that was COVID, we can't extrapolate anything from that. We turned to the early voting statistics because we gave up on the polls that seemed to be inextricably too tight and well within the margins of error in the states that matter. So we're sitting on tenterhooks. Just in the last 24, 36 hours, Casey, I'd say an otherwise inscrutable Harris campaign. Just a few signs starting to come out from some of the analysts there that perhaps they're feeling a little bit confident in the closing week of this campaign, that their internal numbers suggest to them they may have their nose in front in particular the three states that really matter to them: Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. But Casey, other than that small signal, no one, and I've never seen this in a US election, no one is prepared to make a call at this stage.
And of course, you'll find plenty of Trump backers who'll express extreme confidence as well, Simon. Just to the polling quickly, because it does seem like there's been a little bit of a shift toward Donald Trump in national polling. You might have to squint to see it, but in the past week or so, a very small shift maybe in those national headline figures. How significant is that? And does it matter in the grand scheme of things?
It matters in the following way. A, you're right. I would agree with that characterisation. Probably a percentage point, if that, towards Trump, and Harris probably her lead in national polls once you average them and throw away unreliable polls. Once you average what's left, Harris probably a point in front nationally. Now, why is that significant? I don't think there's any doubt that Harris is going to win the popular vote. Or maybe there's some about that, but that's not the real question. The real question is a Democrat needs a rather larger win in the national popular vote in order for that to translate to being ahead in swing states. Typically what happens is that Democrats run up the score in California and New York. That distorts the national picture. So +1 or +2 nationally, as Hillary Clinton will tell you, was not enough to get over the line in 2016. So that's the one caveat there. Then again, you look at the swing state polling, and there's plenty of that, Casey, and that's where the rubber really hits the road. And again, they've been so stable for the last week. Perhaps there also, Casey, a slight hint of a trend towards Donald Trump. But this is going to turn on who gets their voters out, to what extent those polls are picking up what the final shape of this electorate will look like. And that is the hardest part of polling ahead of a US election. Unlike Australian elections with compulsory turnout, in the US, half of your battle, I'd say actually 3/4 of your battle as a US pollster, is figuring out who is going to show up in either casting an early vote or showing up on election day. It's a huge difficulty for US polling.
And so, Simon, the polls are giving us a big shrug at the moment, other than saying it's close. There's not a whole lot to learn there. As you say, the early voting figures are very hard to divine any trend out of because of the peculiarity, particularly of the last election. So let's just fast forward to 8 days from now. You'll be joining us in the studio to unpick the results as they come in. What are you going to be watching for as an early indication of where things might be heading?
Yeah, so for me, I think Pennsylvania is absolutely such a critical state. Everybody who runs the path to 270 electoral college votes, you end up landing on Pennsylvania as pretty much a must-win state for either side. And then we go down into what parts of Pennsylvania, whose vote comes out first. And so Erie County is a county I'll be sweating on their data. It's a key county away from Philadelphia, way out, as the name suggests, near Lake Erie in the far western part of Pennsylvania. That is a bit of a bellwether, and because it's a smaller county, they might have their vote counted early. That will reveal a lot. And the other thing, Casey, statewide in Pennsylvania, on the eastern seaboard, so it'll be early to get going in the count. How much is Trump ahead on election day voting relative to 2020, because we expect this time, as we saw in 2020, Democrats to be doing better in the early vote, which paradoxically gets counted late, and this will be reminiscent of an election you just called in Queensland, where a similar phenomenon was at work. Understanding the relative magnitudes, we've got a good handle on that, but just unpicking that literally in real time, Casey, in the early going is going to tell us a lot about whether, when the dust settles, and it may not be on the night, has Kamala Harris or Donald Trump won that absolutely key state of Pennsylvania. A lot turned on that in 2020. Remember, that was the state I was sweating on calling that election or looking at the returns from that election. Same will apply this time around, Casey.
Indeed. And Professor Simon Jackman, I'm looking forward to seeing you here at our ABC Election Centre in 8 days' time. You better get on a plane and skedaddle back right here. Thanks.
Yeah, likewise. Exactly, Casey. Thank you.
Gemma, Erie County, one of a few counties we're going to talk a lot about in a week's time. So maybe mark that one down on your bingo card.
Definitely. Casey, thank you. And we will, of course, have full coverage of the US election here on the ABC News channel. So join us for the count from 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, the 6th of November. The head of NATO says the deployment of North Korean troops in Russia's Kursk region represents a dangerous expansion of Russia's war in Ukraine. Secretary General Mark Rutte has confirmed the deployment following a meeting with South Korean officials. Last week, Russia's President Vladimir Putin didn't deny that North Korean troops are currently in Russia. Mr. Rutte says NATO allies will continue to support Ukraine.
The deployment of North Korean troops represents one, a significant escalation in the DPRK's ongoing involvement in Russia's illegal war. NATO calls on Russia and the DPRK to cease these actions immediately.
For more on this, let's bring in Emeritus Professor Gilbert Rosman from Princeton University, who joins us from Maryland. Now, Professor Rosman, these North Korean troops are in the Kursk region. What does that tell us about their role at this time?
It tells us that North Korea is just delighted with this opportunity. It's been isolated, it suffered pressure from many countries, and now it's broken out of its isolation, and it improves its military training and probably gets some big advantages in its arms as well. It's a wonderful thing for North Korea, but even more interesting is what it does for Russia, because it gives Russia more leverage over China, and it gives Russia an opportunity to establish its turn to the east, which Putin has been showcasing for 12 years, and now he's got an important new development.
What about the capabilities of North Korean troops? The Wall Street Journal reported that video evidence, intelligence reports suggest that they're likely young men in the early stages of military conscription, not experienced in trench warfare.
Well, of course, they haven't had any fighting in ages. There's no military experience they've had. But nonetheless, these are supposed to be special operation forces, more of an elite group in North Korea. And we'll just have to see what their capabilities are. We have no idea because they haven't been tested.
North Korea has been providing weapons, and we know that Moscow and Pyongyang have been allies since North Korea was founded. What effect has the war in Ukraine had on this relationship?
It strengthened the relationship. It was a relationship that Russia wanted to strengthen for many reasons, and now it really does strengthen it immensely, and it has a big effect on Russia's image, gaining sort of indirect influence by North Korea's ability to threaten countries in Asia. It gives Russia not only an aggressive step in Ukraine, but a more aggressive presence in Asia.
You've spoken about the importance of North Korea in Vladimir Putin's turn to the east, that embracing North Korea is about more than just the Ukraine war, that there is a broader strategy here. What do you mean by that?
Well, he doesn't want to depend entirely on China, and lately it's looked like China dominates and Russia, because it didn't succeed very well in the Ukraine war, and now has to rely on China even more. But the fact that it has North Korea, which wants to play off Russia against China, gives it more leverage versus China. It establishes Russia's identity in Asia, not just as following China, but as having an independent course. And it strengthens its position versus the United States. It wants to reestablish a kind of triangular relationship, China, the United States, and Russia. It wasn't taken very seriously, and this will help it be taken a little bit more seriously.
Gilbert Rosman, Emeritus Professor from Princeton University, thank you so much for your insights on this.
You're welcome.
The uptake of green technology such as electric vehicles and wind turbines is driving a push to source key materials here in Australia. But the potentially lucrative economic opportunity has also revived an old debate about the impact of mining in rich and plentiful farming lands.
South Australia's limestone coast is one of the state's agricultural powerhouses. But for Ken Turner, his mixed farming property has attracted the interest of mining companies hunting for rare earth elements.
They believe there are viable quantities of mineral under the ground here.
Mr Turner's property lies within a 20 square kilometre area earmarked for potential mining. The fledgling Coppermurra project is part of a wave of development aimed at digging up the rare earth elements needed to build electric vehicles and wind turbines.
We see a great opportunity for Australia to develop the rare earth industry. It's a potential to provide jobs and investment.
Most of the world's rare earths come from China, but the push is on to develop a local industry to supply Australia's trading partners.
So I see South Australia's role is actually being potentially being that trusted, secure supply of these resources.
The environmental credentials of the Copper project are still being assessed, and any potential mining here is still several years away. But local producers are concerned about the potential impacts on this rich agricultural land. An opposition group, chaired by farmer Todd Woodard, is concerned about how any future mine here would be rehabilitated.
Getting the macro minerals back in there, the phosphorus and that sort of thing is one thing. Putting the biology back in there is completely different.
While Ken Turner shares some of the group's concerns, he's waiting for more information.
We value our soils, we value our water, we value the environment we live in, so we will be looking very closely when they have a proposal.
A critical issue for Australia's food and financial security. Josh Bryan, ABC News, Rattenbully.
Well, for years, the Adelaide United women's team has struggled to leave a mark on the A-League competition, with its best finish being an elimination final loss a couple of seasons ago. After a poor season last year, the club has brought back a dynamic duo, along with 3 internationals, in a bid to turn its form around.
A team yet to feel success after 16 years in the league. A wooden spoon last year, leaving them hungrier to turn it around this season.
It wasn't our best season, but the good thing is we know how to bounce back. We're professionals and we know what to do, and I think because it was not our favourite season, we want to try and prove ourselves and prove to the league that we're a finals contending team.
The Adelaide United's women's team have had a poor record since the Women's A-League began in 2008. It's the only inaugural club without a grand final berth.
We feel like we can be really competitive and win more matches this year and hopefully push us higher up the table.
Last season, a lack of consistency was the blame, along with issues on both ends of the pitch.
We've got a lot to prove. We know that we're better than what we showed last season, and so we are very hungry to turn it around and make sure that we have a really positive year this year.
A positive pre-season coupled with the return of the danger duo in Fiona Wirtz and Chelsea Dorber has the players hopeful they can be the team's saviour for its attacking woes. The last time the two played together for the Reds, they kicked 23 goals collectively in a season where the team finished a club-high 3rd and making it to an elimination final.
I'm hoping both of them get firing, and if we can do that again, I think we'll be an unstoppable team.
The Reds have further boosted their squad, bringing in 3 more international players, with one of them hoping to provide more attacking options.
I have a very strong kind of focus to go forward, and I think last year they struggled, I guess, kind of scoring some goals, and I hope I can kind of help them out with that and get some goals in the back of the net.
The team believe a strong off-season and hunger will hold the squad in good stead this season. Nethma Dandenia, ABC News.
The Matildas have beaten world number 4 ranked Germany, coming from behind to win 2-1 in Duisburg. Kyra Cooney-Cross starred with this long-range effort.
Back pass, and this sort of moment's been coming. Cooney-Cross is going to shoot from distance. Incredible! Australia are level!
The equaliser was the midfielder's first goal for the Matildas and came after Germany went ahead in the 5th minute. Defender Claire Hunt headed home the winner in the 77th minute. It was the Matildas' first win since interim coach Tom Samani took over. Let's get more on this. Sports journalist and host of the Sports Ambassador podcast, Tracy Holmes, joins us now. Tracy, this was a friendly, but it comes after the Tillies bombed out of the Olympics and they're looking to rebuild their confidence. What a win it was.
Oh, it was an absolutely fantastic win up against the world number 4. The first time they've beaten Germany since Tom Samani was last in charge, and that was more than a decade ago. So they'll take a lot of confidence from this. And as you mentioned, they're in this really awkward phase at the moment. They wanted to do better at the Olympics, building on the back of the FIFA World Cup here in 2023, and that wasn't to be. So they came into this 2-match friendly series against Switzerland and today's game against Germany, really hoping that they could re-establish what they stood for, what the game meant to them, what sort of style they were going to adopt as the Matildas. And so there'll be changes in personnel, of course. We know that Tom Samani has been adamant that he is just a fill-in coach at the moment until the full-time coach is announced, and we don't know when that will be. But Tom is a great hand. He's an old hand, an experienced hand. And as I say, the last time we beat Germany was when he was in charge. So he knows something.
Yeah, it comes around full circle there. Now, if you look at the statistics of the game, which I know avid sports fans and journos like yourself do, Germany had more possession, more shots at goal, but ultimately the Matildas delivered the better score. Can you tell us about their style of play, those goals, of course, and the goal saving of Mackenzie Arnold?
Yeah, look, I think resilience, tenacity, and Tom is also a very big advocate of it doesn't matter how you play the game. The only thing that really matters is the scoreline at the end. And those statistics bear out that fact because Germany had much more possession in this game and really looked like the threatening team for much of the first half, at least. So the equaliser for Australia on the verge of half-time probably changed dynamics a little for that second half. And then, as you say, Australia going 2-1 up to seal that victory. But, you know, this is sort of a debate, isn't it, about, you know, do you win with class or do you just nut out a victory any way you can? And it really does come down to style of play that best suits whichever culture, whichever country, whichever nation you're from. And we know that in the past, both our men's and women's team have been quite notorious and well known around the world for just playing with grit and just grinding out victories when you can. And so maybe it's a return to that kind of mentality. And I think that builds confidence because it's victories that build confidence. Once you know you can win, then you can start working on those other elements, you know, refining the way you win.
And this is under the interim coach, Tom Sermanni, as we said. He's the longest serving coach in Matilda's history. What do we know about his coaching style with this team?
Yeah, he's very much old style, but he's wily. You know, he knows how to go in against some of these teams. He knows what he wants and he knows the staff that can deliver that. When I say staff, I mean players on the field. And so it's also an interesting phase for the Matildas. And I don't know how much this plays in Tom's mind. Does he have to get the Matildas ready for the announcement of who that next coach will be? Or is he just in a holding pattern with the players that he has? Is it time for some of the older players to make way for some of the newer young guns of the team? And we've seen a lot of them performing well in this last friendly series. So, you know, that's the phase the Matildas are in at the moment. They've got 2 matches against Brazil coming up at the end of November, early December in Queensland. And it'll be interesting to see what the team formation looks like at those 2 matches.
And Tracy, the crowd was something that the coach tried to prepare the Matildas for. Obviously, they had adoring crowds in Australia. Not so when they're away.
No, it's not so. But, you know, every professional footballer knows about that. And the more experienced you are, the more you're able to either block that out or to feed off it. And I know you mentioned before Mackenzie Arnold, the goalkeeper, she had a couple of magnificent saves. You know, the ability to work with the crowd and to use that as a motivating factor, whether it's with you or against you, this is what drives athletes and professional athletes who know how to handle any kind of pressure. They use the momentum of the crowd to either work with or against to drive their own performance.
Tracy Holmes, host of the Sports Ambassador podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Gemma.
And taking a quick look at the weather in the capital cities for today, there are possible showers in Brisbane, Sydney and Canberra. The cloud there clearing. Partly cloudy day in Melbourne. There's cloud clearing in Hobart as well. Now, it's a sunny day for Adelaide and Perth, and there is the chance of storms in Darwin, heading for a top there of 36 degrees. And that's ABC News for now. There is some more on the ABC News app and on ABC iView. I'm Gemma Veness. Thanks for your company. More news next.